'cause you're bolder when you say, I am through, I am through. Room for something to begin.